Dan. So this morning, and when we've been traveling around this committee, for members of the public that don't know, this committee, the Governor's Executive Order on Government Efficiencies, is the purpose of our task force is to get representation from across the state. We have a member of the two members of the legislature, Senator Harris from Southern Idaho, Representative Judy Boyle from Midvale, and then we have appointees from all the 7 different regions of the state, including Bobby Joe Millman, Alex Adams, and Keith Reynolds from the executive branch of government. And so we are tasked with finding efficiencies in government, which is very appropriate, and I'm very grateful for the governor's recognition of this being an important part of his administration, because the demand on our services in Idaho are growing at a higher rate than what our economy is growing at. And so it's very important that we try to identify ways that within government we can operate as efficiently and effectively as possible while still delivering a service to the people in Idaho from across the state. So quickly, that's why we're here, that's our purpose. And so the first item on our agenda today, we're here to listen to our local elected officials. And we have Senator Jim Woodward, Representative Heather Scott, Mayor Shelby Ronstadt, did I pronounce that right?
Yeah.
Ronstadt?
That's right.
And County Commissioner Jeff Connolly. So if each one of you would like to just take a quick minute, introduce yourselves, and tell us just a little bit about you, and then we can move right into some discussion about hearing from your perspective. Senator Woodward, we'll start with you.
Well, we'll have to start with Representative Dixon.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's quite all right, Madam Chair. I was a late addition.
I need to put my glasses on.
That's okay. I told Alex I wasn't going to be able to make it, but I had a last-minute cancellation.
Well, welcome. We're so glad
Well,
that
thank
you
you.
made it.
Thank you, Senator Woodward. But I will admit that I didn't know what these questions were before I walked in the room, so I don't have any in-depth or astute answers to those at all. But I would just like to start off by saying thank you very much for coming up here to District 1. This is a rare treat for us to have a executive branch committee or working group come up here. Usually we're having to travel down to Coeur d'Alene or other places in order to participate with the executive branch, and that is a point, I think, to be made, not necessarily directly at efficiency, but this is a nice treat for us to have, and it's something to keep in mind that we're often asked to travel some distances to facilitate our respective offices as well, but thank you for being up here. Just off the top of my head, there was a couple things I thought of when I knew I was going to be here, and it's not necessarily to efficiency of these questions, but when you're dealing with our rural districts, and especially those up north us or in the Far East, it's important to consider the distances that our constituents have to travel when they're going for government services, for our Department of Labor and our Department of Health and Welfare. And a good example of that is Boundary County primarily that we have here. And I think, well, with the Department of Labor, that seems to be going very well. Director Revere, has done a good job at moving, as they've brought some efficiency to that office and shrunk it a little bit. She's reaching out to the different areas of that community in Boundary County where their people are able to go. They're not being required to travel down to Sandpoint, which often happens, and it's very difficult for a lot of our constituents as well. So that's something I wanted to just bring up and to keep in mind for the executive branch and our agencies moving forward to, as our acreages get larger, it's longer to travel for people and often difficult when they are seeking the government assistance. So if we can look for those efficiencies of travel maybe for our constituents in doing that, and I think we're doing a good job at this point, it appears, but there's always things that fall through the cracks. And the second thing was a reminder to some of the employees of the agencies, and it's not always, but they work for the citizens of the state, and oftentimes we hear reports of their interaction with employees of agencies where they just don't consider what somebody is going through when they're seeking help. And doors get shut and our citizens get very frustrated in doing that. And it's not everybody, and I think we are improving that with this turnover in the executive branch has brought a lot of hopeful things and a lot of optimism really. But that's something to consider as well, and maybe as we're discussing these things with our directors of the agencies, just to remind their staff and their people that we are here to serve the citizens of Idaho, not their agency, not to seek to make their lives easier, but serving our citizens, because that's some of the feedback I think we hear a lot also. So not directly related to efficiency, but I'm happy to be here, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for being here, and thanks for those comments. Senator Woodward.
Good morning, my name is Jim Woodward, so I'm the Senator for Legislative District 1. For those who are, I know Bear Lake's a long ways from here, and some other people have traveled a long ways. So Legislative District 1 starts at the Canadian border. We come right on down through all of Boundary County and most of Bonner County. The split is Highway 95. When you're on the Long Bridge, if you're looking to the east, that's District 7. So when the point out there, that's the northernmost point of Legislative District 7. And then anything on the west side of the bridge and all the way down to down south to where Representative Scott lives is all is still District 1 on the west side of the highway. So a fairly large area, not as big as 7 and 8, but a fairly large bit of area to cover. And like any district, we have some different communities. Sandpoint is very much a resort community. We have Schweitzer, if you're looking up the hills to see the ski area. And then in the summertime, everybody's out on the lake. And so we have those two distinct seasons here, tourist seasons, along with all the additional load that is placed on both the infrastructure, human and physical infrastructure that we have here. Bonner's Ferry is a little bit different, still more rural and agricultural, and doesn't see the fluctuations in population. We don't have. Bonner's Ferry doesn't have nearly the number of seasonal homes like Sandpoint that the Bonner County area has. So differences there. And then you also, just like in any of the districts, you see the differences between population centers and rural areas. But we have those Priest Lake, Clark Fork, some of these communities that are smaller. Priest Lake is also a resort there are about 400 people, I think, who live there annually. But then that number swells drastically during the summertime. So that's Legislative District 1. Glad to represent it. Happy to have a discussion about being efficient here and how we take care of some of the Idaho citizens.
Great, thank you, Senator. Commissioner.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Conley, and I represent District 2 in Bonner County. That is Priest Lake, Priest River, Blanchard, that area. So the eastern part of the county. Or western part of the county. Whew, that was close. You got to know where you're at, right? So the thing that I have been working on since I've got into government, which was about 2 years and 8 months ago, is trying to streamline government, and it's a challenge, as we all know. And when you have these counties that have the hundreds of thousands of acres that we have, it's a challenge to try to give the services to the people that are at Priest Lake when most of our stuff is central in Sandpoint. So we have to, and we have started going with our planning and zoning to these areas and working on these sub-area plans, which I think is an important thing to get the people that are in the outlying areas participating. So we're going to incorporate those sub-area plans into our comp plan, and all of these communities have had a chance to participate. So we've got like 6 sub-area comp plans that we've been working on, and it's a struggle. Every little area is a special area, so we have been working hard on that. As far as efficiencies, I don't think you want me to go through all of these, but I think that hopefully will come up in the discussion. There's these partnerships, obviously, with the state and the counties, and sometimes it's a struggle. You've got your courts and you've got your license and your driver's license. These partnerships can be a struggle. It almost seems like either the state should do it or the county should do it. You want to streamline it that way. Somebody should say, these guys are in charge and they're taking care of it, rather than to blame it on each other all the time on what the issues are, what the problems are. Those are some of the highlights of what we're working on, but I don't know, during the discussion, I've got plenty more.
Okay, great. We'll have lots of opportunity to hear from more of your ideas. Representative Scott, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for coming to our district. I'm Representative Scott, another Representative A, and serve with Representative Dixon. I just got this morning too, so I did write down some of my thoughts, and I don't know how much time we'll have to address them, so I'm going to try to hit the highlights in case we don't get into the discussion. So my first comment is regional government efficiency. That seems like such an oxymoron to me. Regional government takes away representation from the citizens and from the individual, and anytime we regionalize things, I understand efficiency, but when you regionalize, you take away representation and you take away ability to redress grievances when decisions are made, because you have unelected bureaucrats making decisions. And so I have some concerns just with the title of your group, although I love the efficiency part. So I wanted to just address a few things. I mean, one of the questions is, how can we become more efficient? And I think about the federal government when they didn't pass the budget, and they said, we're going to get rid of all of the, what they call them, non-essential employees. And I think we really need to look at how large our bureaucratic offices have grown, not under this administration, but under previous administrations. And we really need to look at, do we have non-essential employees working in the bureaucracies that maybe we need to remove positions and give people more responsibility within the agency themselves. I think too, we need to look at the spending of these bureaucracies. Each year, the base budget just continues to increase 3%, and we continue to allow that increase without really addressing the increased spending. And so a good way to increase the efficiency, what I see would be to reduce some of the spending. And are we wasting? Of course we're wasting. And I think your group maybe have a copy of the subscriptions and memberships, $5 million from agencies and what they are putting into subscriptions and memberships that may be working against the individual citizens and individual rights in our communities. So that's an easy waste to get rid of almost instantly. I have a lot of notes. I don't want to overwhelm you. The other thing I'd just like to touch on is in our Constitution, it talks about the executive branch shall be allocated by law not more than 20 departments, and then it allows them to do divisions and departments. And my last look, we have over 100 different departments, divisions, boards, commissions, licensing offices. If we can look at ways to reduce them or combine them within themselves instead of regionalizing services to communities and individuals, that's kind of the direction I'd like to see the executive branch take. So I'll just stop there.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you. That's some good feedback there. And Mayor Ronstadt.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. And again, I echo the sentiments of my previous electeds. We really appreciate you coming to the northern region here and spending this time with us. It's great to have this kind of outreach and engagement. So thank you very much for making the trip. And I welcome you to our lovely city. So I feel like I'm in a little bit of a different position than my fellow electeds up here. Being a municipality, we don't deal directly with state agencies to the degree that the county and of course the legislature does. I hope that I can continue to participate in this discussion constructively. What I can say is that I find that there is a lot of utility and efficiency that can be gained in working together across jurisdictions. I've certainly seen that in my tenure here in 4 years and beyond that. We've done a lot as a city to create efficiencies internally and in our, within our agency. However, where I see increased opportunities and where we've had recent successes is identifying duplicate services. For example, fire and EMS is one area where we've begun to move towards some regionalization within our county. And what that does is it allows us to make better use of our resources, actually improve our services without increasing cost of the system. I think there's more opportunities there. I think there's still some duplication of services that's happening right now, particularly with EMS. I'm not sure how this directly relates to the state, but and to the executive, but I do think that there's opportunities there that I'd like to explore. And another issue that I think can be relevant, and I think this can become an issue in terms of efficiency, is how we aggregate and analyze our sales data within the state. I think it would be great if the state of Idaho could move towards a point of sale system in terms of being able to aggregate and analyze our data in terms of revenues and sales throughout the state. I think it would be a great benefit to local municipalities, to counties, and other taxing districts if we can get a better handle on where exactly what revenues and are coming in, where they're coming from, and really be able to drill down to specific taxing districts. Certainly something that I've heard within my constituency and across the state. I served on the Association of Idaho Cities Board, and there was a lot of discussion around point of sale, well, I should say overall, the tax sharing formula. As it's been, as we've been practicing it since I think 1966. It's been a long time that we've had the same revenue sharing formula, and I think that it's out of date and unfair when we look at how that's applied city to city, and I think that it's something that would be constructive for us to look at. And if the state, well, it would require an investment and a change internally for the state to be able to have the kind of software and infrastructure to be able to host a point of sale system. I think the overall efficiencies and improvements in revenue sharing would make a dramatic difference into the future for the state. There's a lot of other things that I'd like to address when we have the opportunity to look at some of these questions point by point. But again, I just want to thank you all for making the trip, and I look forward to the presentations today and a healthy discussion. Thanks again.
Great, thank you so much. At this point, are there any questions from any members of the committee for any of the elected officials? Okay. We'll just move in then, and we'll learn about the presentation a little later from the controller's office. Mayor, maybe if you could specify, when you refer to point of sale and revenue sharing, what are you specifically referring to, like various fees that the localities bring in? Or is it what you bring in from the taxing districts?
Yeah, what we bring in from the taxing districts, so right now, as I understand it, we can generally aggregate the total sales that happen within a district, but we can't identify what types of sales they are, or whether they're to the specificity with which they are reflective of that district, if that makes sense. So, in other words, so when we look at things like a local option tax, for example, we can aggregate the total sales that happen, say, within a municipality, but we can't say, what types of sales for what types of goods and services. A lot of times those local option taxes are structured such that they're sparse, so that things like groceries and essential goods, medical services, those kinds of things are not taxed, where what you might consider luxury items or generic retail kinds of items are identified for tax. So I think if the state were able to more accurately track what kinds of sales and with specificity where those sales are happening with regards to particular taxing districts, I think it would go a long way in terms of the state being able to develop a more fair revenue sharing formula that would ultimately, I think, benefit every taxing district in the state if we're to ensure that everybody's getting a fair deal.
Okay. And I don't know if any members of the legislature might want to weigh in on this, those that may have served on the tax committee. How that?
Madam Chair, if I may, Representative Dixon, we started looking at this tax distribution formula a little bit in the House last year. There was a change brought forward within the House, and I think the sponsor just brought it out for discussion, didn't decide to go further with it. But up here, and specifically in a town called Ponderay in our district, there's a large disparity between the revenues they receive compared to the revenues they remit to the state, because their population is so small, but their commercial base is so large. So what the mayor's talking about may have larger benefit than maybe just what his objective, not to say denigrate it in any way, but what he's seeking, there may be more benefit than just what he's seeking in approaching something like that. That's not information that the tax commission gives us. They don't have that delineated. When I've asked repeatedly to see what other cities within the state may be in a similar situation with Ponderay to try and adjust that revenue sharing formula that we have.
Do they have the information, they just don't want to share it?
I haven't got a clear answer, Madam Chair. I'm sorry. I've tried for a few years, and it's always, well, I've heard we'll get it to you, and then never have a follow-up conversation. I'm hoping to talk to the new chair of the tax commission.
Madam Chair, I can answer that. I think part of the problem is I think the tax commission can get it, but they don't have those software, so it doesn't, I think it's by the way their software works, so like you can't look at one county specifically, like you can look at a region. So I think that's part of the challenge is the software and kind of how they track it, that makes it difficult, but so they have to, I think, aggregate all that information. That's my understanding.
You're exactly right, and that's been my experience as well, from what I understand.
So you'd like to see more transparency from the tax commission on the revenues, where they're coming in?
That would help what I'm seeking, at least so we know what the situation is across the state and trying to find the most equitable revenue sharing formula.
Okay, great, thank you. Senator Woodward?
Madam Chair, just at the risk of being off with my numbers a little bit, just to give you an idea of the discrepancy there and what he's referring to. So that city of Ponderay has Walmart, Home Depot, 3 car dealers, but a population of just a few hundred, 1,200, okay. And I think that the article in the Sandpoint Daily Bee last week said that the sales tax generation, it's on the order of millions. The number I remember is 8.
Or 300 million is total sales.
And so, so 18 million, that's correct. So
Right.
there's $18 million in sales tax collected in the city of Ponderay, and I think the distribution was a few hundred thousand.
Around 300,000, I believe.
So quite a discrepancy. And so activity is occurring. There may only be 1,200 people living in the city limits of Ponderay, but the number of people working there daily and the number of the roads, the utilities, all that, the government, the infrastructure required to support that amount of sales volume is there.
Okay, I understand, thank you. Okay. Alex?
Governor, I had a question for Representative Dixon. One of the comments that he made was, I believe I heard you commend what labor is doing and that you believe that that's an effective model. We actually actually just got done touring the local labor office and learning about their new model. So just be curious what you're hearing from your citizens. I know it's increase their footprint in some of the smaller communities certain days of the week. What feedback are you hearing from your constituents on that?
Madam Chair, thank you. And Mr. Adams, nothing specifically yet, but what was encouraging was the fact that they were making that effort to go to the farther parts of, or at least staying up there in Boundary County, because before, when something would close like that, they'd have to come down to Sandpoint, and that's a heavy burden. That's a long way. It may not seem like a long way, but it's a long way, and especially in the winter, to get back down here. So the fact that they were identifying local spots where people could go to them, like the visitor center, that's a good one, and I think there's one out in Moyer Springs as well, and then one towards the south end of the county. So people are able to go on specific days, so there's schedule, it's consistency, they know when they're going to be there to get their help, and they still have that face-to-face local help that a lot of people still enjoy rather than just our online, which a lot of people use also, and that reduces a lot of the workload, but they're still making that effort to reach out into the community. That's what I thought was a positive. I haven't heard anything specific yet from the constituency, but that was a good direction to move in my opinion.
Okay, one thing I did want to clear up, because I wanted to address the concern of Representative Scott, because I have heard this from other individuals as well, that we're not looking to establish any form of additional level of regional government. In fact, when we were discussing how to write the executive order, and we worked together with the governor's office, and how do we get the best representation across the state and different regions. There's a different set of regions for Department of Health and Welfare. There's a different set of region in our judicial district. There's a different set of region, ITD,
Transportation.
commerce. Yeah, so our state is kind of, broken up different ways to represent some of those different interests. But we're not here to, we're not going to create another confusing region representation across the state, but rather, as I said, if any decisions are going to be made on, closing offices or doing things better within state government, we want to listen to the different parts of the state and how those things might impact your communities, because Idaho is so vast. What might work well in Custer County may not work well up here in Bonner or Boundary. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. So, yeah, Representative.
Yeah, and if I may just clarify a bit, I was trying to get things out quickly. I'm more concerned about the jurisdictional boundaries between city, county, and state. And if you're condensing services within the state, that's kind of one thing. But when we start going over those jurisdictional boundaries and blurring the lines, that's where my red flags go up. It may be easier, but that's why I think, our state, I just think those jurisdictional boundaries are there for a reason.
Yes.
And we need to protect them at all costs, because that's the way our government's designed.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that clarification. So, Alex, go ahead.
Governor, just one last one, and it might be for the mayor or anyone else who wants to take a stab at it, but as a committee this morning, we started off at Panhandle Health District and then jotted across up to the Department of Health and Welfare building, which is 12 minutes away. It was up in Ponderay, and then we headed back to labor. I understand there's also a voc rehab office and a veteran services office, and just wondered if you might think that there can be efficiencies gained by having the state agencies more located together, co-located, or if you think that the current mix of what you see with how things are laid out is optimized and working well for your citizens.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it would make a lot of sense if that, if that is something that the state is looking at and is interested in, and it makes sense fiscally, certainly from our perspective. I mean, we really appreciate having county services housed in one building. Sandpoint's the county seat for Bonner County. I think it would be fantastic if we could see city services housed in one facility. If that makes sense for for you, certainly makes sense for our constituents.
Madam Chair, if I may
Yes,
as
go
well,
ahead,
or should I address you as Madam Lieutenant Governor, which is more appropriate?
Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Lieutenant Governor.
That's Sage Dixon.
Mr. Adams, that speaks again a little bit to Boundary County, and when we lost the Health and Welfare Office up there, something I was trying to work on with the current director, or not the current, but the past Director of Labor, is bringing them into that building, so we were using state resources efficiently in that sense. So absolutely, I think that would be great, because a lot of people use the same state or different state resources, and not having them go in a lot of different directions is far more efficient. And then when we do have those need for closure or decrease of staff, then they're still located in the same place, and it's not quite as difficult. So I think that's a great idea.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would like to comment also. So you brought up Panhandle Health, and why we don't have, the county doesn't have a problem with Panhandle Health and the job they do. It's a huge bag of tricks that they are in charge of. And one of the things that comes up quite frequently is the sewer permits. We think at the county that we could probably do that job and, you know, do it better, because we're already issuing the building location permits, we're issuing the addresses, we're issuing all the different things. What we're trying to work towards is having a one-stop shop. So when you go into the county building, you don't have to go to 4 different agencies, or 5, maybe even more, because you've got electrical that the state does, you've got plumbing that the state does, and you have, you know, the Panhandle Health District, which they have to go for their sewer permit. What we'd like to see is try to be able to do it, like you come into the planning and zoning and you come in for your permit for your house, that you can walk out of there with everything you need to get that done. Because this is way lengthy process to go through, and very expensive, because everybody tags a fee to it. So in my opinion, these are some things we can do without too much pain, and we can actually make it a lot nicer for the citizens to be able to go to one spot and get what they need.
Well, and this is really exactly what we want to hear, these ideas, and following up on that, so there was a, when Jamie Revere was giving her presentation on utilizing an office space in City Hall, there was a concern brought up in one of the communities about liability. So the state agency has a $500,000 limit on liability, but the cities don't. So, you know, why would the cities be willing to do that if they might have to pick up some additional liability by hosting a state agency or a person coming in to take care of state business? So we want to hear those kind of things. So whether it's a change in statute that our friends in the legislature need to address, or just help educate the local officials, as Keith referred to, that possibly, you know, there are certain circumstances that the state might be able to alleviate that concern. So that's really what we're here for, and what we want to hear from you. And, yeah, go ahead, Mayor.
Madam Chair. So along the lines of both what the Commissioner and Representative Dixon shared, not only, I think that's a great idea to combine the services and state services under one facility. And not just for the efficiencies for the users, as you said, Commissioner, which is absolutely right. But also, we've done this similarly internally. We are moving towards what we're calling one-stop shop. So if you're a developer, for instance, you can come into City Hall, you go to one window, you get your permit, you get any, your site plan review, whatever you need to get addressed, you get taken care of at one window, and ultimately we're working towards one check. We're still working on that, because there's multiple fees involved, right? But what we realize is that not only is this just easier for everybody, but there's also opportunities for cross-training, and so you can have, say, one receptionist or customer service agent, or one person taking the check versus one person at each of those facilities. So there's a lot of opportunity for savings in labor there as well. I think that's worth considering.
And this morning, when we did have the opportunity to visit the Panhandle Health District and then go to the Department of Health and Welfare, I think that was actually a good experience for us because it brought to my mind a health clinic that I visited in Benoit County. It's the Marin. And this is a different model because it's through Indian tribal health. But they really have this one-stop shopping model at that health facility where they combine behavioral health, medical, they have a medical home, there's a pharmacy, WIC is there. And so, you know, it made me think, that's the model that they operate on over there seems to serve their community very well. And it can be, you know, that's a long-term goal to have across our state. But as much as we can, you know, to try to combine those two buildings and the services, the different services that they provide into one-stop shopping, to have a community home for the individual. That's the kind of ideas that we're exploring, looking at. Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you have an idea of how many state buildings are in District 1 right now? How many state offices?
Well, I can't give you that answer right off the top of my head unless Alex knows. But to be truthful with you all, that was one of the first things that we started taking a look at through this committee is with every new administration, the incoming administration should be able to receive an inventory of either state-owned or state-leased buildings all across the state. And not every case was it very clear. In fact, the Department of Administration has already done a lot of work, and they've created this great model where you can click on any city, any county, and they've got the data in there that an individual citizen can go and look at all of the state-owned or state-leased buildings that are in that region. So I don't know if you want to speak to that at this point.
I'd be happy to, Governor, thank you. So, the Department of Administration is the state's insurer, so, as a result, we have a database of all the buildings. I'm sorry, I wish I would've looked to see what was, specifically in District 1. But that information is available and it is public information, so, anyone who has interest, we're able to provide that and are happy to.
Can you tell people how to get to the link off your website?
Trying to remember where it is. Oh, Department of Administration has a website. There's a GIS link there that should take you to the database we're talking about, and it is an interactive map that you can click on any place. It will show you by color coding whether it's an owned property or a leased property, and then you can zero down a little further on that. But there's a lot of information available, and I will see if I can make sure I've got that address right up. I'll send somebody a message now and share it if I can get it.
John, did you?
Yeah, I've got the link right here, an example of the map that I can show to anybody after we're done here. It really is a pretty impressive tool. And you can see this is just public tell, there's a lot of dots. So yeah, good question.
And in those, when you click on that wherever it is, whichever building, whichever location, it'll the information like how much the amount of money they're paying for the lease, the terms, at least the length, the time when the lease expires. All of that information is available, and then the property value of the buildings as well. So, you know, it's great to have that kind of information now at our fingertips that we didn't have that information before. Yeah, go ahead,
Thank you. Senator Woodward, I have a question for you. Being a member of JFAC, I'm just curious if, looking at agency budgets, if anything, when it comes to kind of regional offices or subscriptions or anything like that has stuck out to you. I know you're new to JFAC, but just curious kind of what your perspective is when it comes to regional offices throughout the state.
Representative.
Madam Chair, I can't say that anything really stands out. You do start to, especially in the first year, take a look at some of the bigger pictures. And Representative Scott shared with me last year a list of all the subscriptions, and that was a surprising quantity and a dollar amount of what the different subscriptions the state has. So that caught me a little bit last year. It was one of the things that stood out. But it's a pretty large organization too, so sometimes you have to delve into the details to understand why, whether that's professional education or what the requirement is. But I will say sometimes it's easy that as time rolls on, we accumulate, and just like we see in the rules review process this year, sometimes you need to do some spring cleaning. Maybe that's the case.
Any other questions from the members of the committee?
Madam Chairman, they've raised some kind of intriguing questions that I just kind of want to throw out. Having a jurisdictional deference so that you can provide one-stop shopping for various kinds of services makes a lot of sense. But the problem is you have these jurisdictional statutory differences in those services. How do you get over those? How do you get over those distinctions so that you can have a more efficient governmental system?
I'd share a thought on
Everybody
that.
wants to weigh in on that one.
But when the idea was mentioned here just a few minutes ago, it started to go through my mind, that same question. And I think that model perhaps is just a lead agency. Who is ultimately responsible for a building permit? Or who is ultimately responsible for, the Long Bridge permitting? Multiple agencies weighed in. On that larger scale, that is the model they use. The Coast Guard was put in charge in this case, and the other agencies had to work underneath. And so if we're going to talk about a building permit, perhaps it is appropriate that the county issues a building permit or the municipality, depending on what location you are. And maybe that model says that that Panhandle Health works in conjunction, if there's going to be a health district for subsurface sewage disposal, that there's a liaison there, or that happens between the county. Or maybe it would take more to shift away from what we have now. It would take more, it would be a greater stretch to hand over subsurface sewage disposal to the county, I think. But we're working under DEQ guidelines, those are state guidelines. But perhaps there's a model there that they're all tied together, but maybe that's less efficient.
I might disagree just a touch, because what my theory is, and what I come from, obviously 40 years of private industry, and there's rules attached to all of these. So when you go to electrical, plumbing inspection, the state does those. When you go to Panhandle Health, obviously they do those inspections. But what you expect from those agencies is the same thing you would expect from, say, if the county did decide, say, hey, we'll do that because we think it fits where we are better than, having all these different people. I mean, you have a plumbing and an electrical inspector. They show up on that same job site. So do our guys. So does Panhandle Health. How can that be efficient? So what I'm saying is the legislation can put the rules forth that the code is the code, and this is what you have to enforce. It could be the same people that are enforcing the electrical and plumbing right now. I think it can be done. I mean, it's a far stretch from where we are right now, but I think that's what it's going to take. I think that we get into that mode where we just well, this is the way we've always done it, so we're just gonna continue to do it like this, but I think that there's a better way.
And Representative Scott, did you want to weigh in on that also?
Just that the design of government is to be fighting and to be hard, because we believe in individual liberties and freedoms. And when we consolidate government, when we break down those boundaries, it may be better for government, but it takes more control out of the power, out of the hands of the people. And so I just caution, you know, it might be easier for government to administer rules and put regulations on us and control what's happening, but that ultimately takes away liberties and freedoms from the people. And that's my concern, is by making government more efficient, you do make it easier to control the citizens. So that's all I wanted to share.
Madam Chairman, I have a follow-up.
Yeah, make it, if you wouldn't mind making it very short, because we're running up on time, and I want to give each of the panelists a little opportunity to wrap up any comments that they have, so go ahead.
Well, there's always been this old theory that the best government is that that's closest to the people. And I guess my question was, is there a way to get there?
And my response, thank you, Madam Chair, and my response is to, if you want to get it closer to the people, then take some of that control away from the state and allow the counties to manage sewage or this or that. Give that, and that's the question, is the state willing to give that control over to the counties to make it closer to the people? Maybe they are, but I would doubt it, but maybe, I would hope.
Okay, so with that, since we are up against time, I would like to give each of the panelists an opportunity, if you would take just a few seconds. I was gonna give you each a minute, but now we don't have 10 minutes. I know we're all politicians, it's hard to talk in less than a minute, but if you would just please take a few minutes to either respond to anything that's been said or any of the questions that we showed you this morning. So go ahead, we'll start with Mayor. We'll go this way.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate the conversation and opinions that have been shared here today, and I like where generally where this discussion is going. With regards to this concept of collaborating across boundaries or regionalization, you know, we still have an elected system of government, and you know, I think fire for me is a great example. You know, we have multiple jurisdictions within a confined area within the region, and they each have their firehouse, their equipment, their staff. They each have to be managed with HR, payroll, you know, all of that stuff, legal, etc. So, you know, that fire truck sits there, you know, all but maybe 30 minutes a day. It might sit there in the station, and that's true in every firehouse. And so it really makes sense, we're talking about efficiency, it really makes sense to look at, well, how can we put our resources together, have better response times, faster response times, better coverage throughout, so let's say the county, for example, or throughout the region. And yet, you know, maybe we can even reduce some staffing, or maybe we can even, you know, make do with one less, you know, piece of equipment and that kind of thing. And yet each of those are still governed by an elected body, right? We're not taking power away from the people, so, or representation away from the people. So I just would push back on that idea that because we're talking about collaborating across boundaries or districts, that invariably means that, you know, that we're not representing the people. I don't think that that's accurate.
Okay, thanks for your comments. Representative Scott.
Thank you. So I have no problem with making government more efficient, and I think a lot of that maybe to look within our agencies themselves to spending and budgets and how big they've grown, and can we reduce that size? You know, I just always want to protect those jurisdictional boundaries, and I definitely want to protect the jurisdictional boundaries where people can actually vote for or vote against their elected officials. And so I've shared many of my concerns today, but I'm all for more efficient government. So thank you guys for studying this issue, thank you for engaging the community, and hopefully we can move forward with this.
Thank you very much, appreciate that. Commissioner?
I'd like to thank all of you for having this conversation, because it can go on for hours here, obviously, because there's a lot of differing thoughts, and I think that we have a lot of the same concerns. One of the things that I'll challenge Mayor Rockstad is to look outside the Sandpoint, the Dover, this, what I call a core of where everything is, and look towards the Priest Lakes, the Blanchards, the Clark Forks. To utilize some of these models, it doesn't work everywhere because you don't have the population. So, you know, we're forcing some of the way we do business, and it's not probably the best way to do business. There's better ways to do it in the population, but it doesn't work everywhere. So, and as we've worked, you know, with our municipalities, the county does struggle sometimes to work with the municipalities, and we're trying. I've been trying because I come from city government, 15 years at the city of Priest River, so I realize the struggles that kind of go on sometimes between the counties and cities, but we're working towards a better relationship there. And I think that one of the things that the mayor touched on, which I think is a pretty good idea too, is it also addresses Representative Scott's point, is that even if you have these different fire districts, they still have the commissioners that are elected commissioners, so they can choose to say, have a contract with a different outside agency to manage them, and that way you get a better body of management. And then the district can actually, obviously, unvote those people that have voted that in, and or change that. So there's still that, they still have their hands on that. And I'm sorry if I ran over, but I can't quit. This is just an intriguing conversation.
Thank you so much for your comments, Commissioner. Senator Woodward.
Oh, I think I can defer if you used up all my time.
Representative Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just thank you again for coming up here. It is very important to us and to our constituents that we get this attention that we sometimes are wanting it. And thank you to the governor and his staff, and you, Lieutenant Governor, for this committee. It's important. I think we can find efficiencies, to your point, Mr. Carlson. I think it'll take some work, and as you go throughout the state, things will come together. You'll start to see a similar stream, and then we can, it may be small just at first, but we'll be able to make some headway. But do take into account the smaller population centers, and sometimes efficiencies make it more difficult for those folks in the rural areas and smaller population centers. So we need to be mindful of that as we move forward. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for being here. This is definitely one of our most engaging sessions, and it's all because of you. And we appreciate you being here and sharing your perspective with us. Thank you.